Welcome to Operating with Positive Impact, a brand new series of podcasts brought to you by PwC. My name is Anthony Nev, and throughout this series, I'll be your personal guide in shaping your organization into a sustainable business. Together, we will deep dive into the world of sustainability and its impact on a business world. Since the start of our podcast, some of you might be wondering, where is the social component, the big S of ESG? Today, we will be listening to Samar and Jessica as they guide us in their reflection on the social component of sustainability. Let's follow their conversation.
Hi, I'm Jessica De Bels. I'm an employment lawyer from PwC Legal, and I'm here with Samar today.
Hi, I'm Samar. I'm Samar Héchaimé. I am actually leading sustainable strategy transformation and social impact at PwC Belgium. Here today, we're going to be talking about social impact, the S in the ESG, that big elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this, Jessica. It's the central letter of a three-letter combination, and yet it's the most ignored one from all policy, not all policies, from a lot of and from the push into sustainable futures.
Yes, indeed. It's a bit of the ugly duckling, I think, from in ESG, or it's treated that way in any case. But it's for me, it's one of the most important pillars because social and people are at the heart of everything, right? So maybe to first give a bit of insight in what I consider to be covered by the social aspect of the S in ESG. For me, it's about stakeholders and managing those stakeholders. And in my experience, usually when people talk about the S in ESG, they immediately think of workforce. They think it's my employees, it's my unions. Some people even say, okay, it's also my supply chain, but often that's where it ends. But for me, the S is, of course, much broader. It's not only about your employees, it's about people in general and the society in which you as a company are operating in. So for me, it's also a good momentum, I think, to focus on the fact that it's much broader than what companies usually think.
Indeed, it is essentially the pillar of our societies. In the way we're operating around creating sustainable or even just strategies, the way we're building strategies needs to look at the system approach, behavioral sciences, and having a creative mindset to change into innovation. That means in putting the people at the heart of the equation of organizations and the equation of our societies and our governance and policies. We have to remember we created the world we live in. It's people. And that means we created the unsustainable way of life that we live in. And to change that, people have to change and shift towards a more sustainable future and a more socially inclusive and accessible future for all. So that means from the organization itself, how do we look at redesigning our organizations to be more people-centric, but also to the products and services we create that could be more accessible, more inclusive, more equitable, and more sustainable in all across the complete value chain. Yeah. So we cannot just look at it from one angle and one point of view, which is the workforce, and one key point such as diversity and inclusion. It means we have to look at it in a 360 across multiple locations, multiple cultures, and multiple structures.
Yep. Indeed. And I get it, because for companies, investing in your workforce is, of course, an easy go-to. And don't get me wrong, I think it's very important. You as an employer, as a company, can have real added value towards the employee experience that you have, and to really invest in more work-life balance, for example, providing a work environment that's inclusive, giving options to work in a company for people of different backgrounds, different disabilities and abilities. So you have a lot of options, and it's an easy go-to the workforce. But yeah, not only from a legislative point of view, but the broader scope is just as important. The last day I was talking to someone, and they pointed out an example of a company that has designed chips that is being used in medical equipment, for example. And as such, it's a very noble purpose of a company to do so. And they pay good attention to their value chain, to their supply chain, especially upstream. And now downstream, they have come to the conclusion that their chips are also a great fit to be used in weapons and machinery. So that's a great example of an unexpected buyer from your product, but it doesn't mean because it's weaponry that it should be immediately excluded, of course, but it is something to take into consideration. So, and that's really what I mean when you really need to take it into a broad scope, not only workforce, not only supply chain, but value chain, downstream and upstream.
Yeah. It is the ripple effects, and they're never ending.
Yep.
And that's why system thinking is very important. And you need to realize what your impacts are and act upon it. And of course, the big example of something similar to your example is Alfred Nobel, having realized that his invention could be beneficial on one hand, but could be destructive on another, felt the need to go as far as create the Nobel Prize to mitigate and help push innovation towards the betterment of people and societies and the planet itself. So we also need to think about ourselves in the context of societies and planets, and organizations don't operate in isolation, especially the organizations we work with. They're global organizations that cross territories and have impact all over the world. Yep. That means they have the biggest opportunities to create positive impact. As the name of our podcast and our book suggests, we need to think about operating with positive impact.
Yep, indeed. And taking that into account, the social aspect, respect of human rights, creating equal opportunities, banishment of slavery, it's been around for years. It's not a new element. It's an issue or a point of attention that's been going on for decades and hundreds of years. So taking that into account, it's a bit odd that the S in ESG is a bit neglected or has been neglected. And when talking about sustainability, the discussion mostly refers to the environmental aspect, which is, of course, equally important. But as I said, it's equally important. So the S shouldn't get less attention, in my opinion. And the odd thing about that, it's also reflected in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at it, 8 out of 17 of the Social Development Goals are focused on the social aspect, whereas only 7 are referred to the environmental aspect. So even when defining the SDGs, it really became apparent that the social aspect is really important if we want to have a sustainable world in which all companies and people can thrive.
And even if we look at the ESRS framework, where the E and S and the G are quantified, the 2 E and the G are about people, because you've got the S, which is your own workforce, S1. The S2 is people in your value chain and workers in your value chain. The 3 are your affected communities, and 4 are your consumer and workers. But the G is about the governance and the decisions we make as people to get to a better sustainable future. Now, if I take a company that has actually integrated all of these in a very interesting and innovative ways, I would say Patagonia. Yes, because definitely. Patagonia has looked at creating a structure to its organization that is beneficial for the society it sits in and the bigger society, but also has brought in the planet as one of its stakeholders. So it's an official stakeholder in the board of Patagonia. Now, how do you bring the voice of the planet and the voice of the people? That's always the big question. But that means they're giving it the platform to be an active stakeholder. So we move away from the profit-driven, exploitative, binary models of businesses and organizations into purpose-driven organizations that are about the embetterment of life for all living things.
Yes, definitely. And what I personally also really like about Patagonia is that they also had a great, I think we mentioned it in the book as well, a great example of a sustainable HR transformation. So what I like about them, they have this mission statement, they incorporated it in their corporate strategy, but it also trickles down to their employees. For example, in terms of HR, they really looked, okay, which benefits can we, for example, give to our employees that align with our sustainability strategy. For example, employees can get time off if they want to do volunteer work that benefits the planet. So it can be cleaning besides the highway or different initiatives that they can take. And it's part of their remuneration package at Patagonia. And that's what I really like. They don't only do this as a mission statement outside, but they really try to incorporate it and engage all their stakeholders to live that strategy and execute it together with them, up to their employees as well.
To me, what that takes into consideration to create a strategy that's a human-centric strategy for the organization, it acknowledges that behaviorally speaking, culturally speaking, an individual is part of that group, part of that collective, and an individual's sense of belonging changes throughout their lives and throughout the day. So, for example, they understand that an employee is not just an employee. They're part of the community. They're buyers as well. They're end users and consumers as well. And they're affected so they're affected communities. That simple redesign of the organization that Patagonia has done puts one individual in the different categories that we consider around the S of the ESGs.
Yep.
And that is a brilliant move because at the moment, most organizations look at the individual as one or the other, not all together. But none of us are one or the other. At the moment, that very moment, I am an employee, a worker at PwC. But the moment I step out, I'm a friend, I'm a person, I'm an individual. I have hobbies and I have sorrows and pains as well. And these are affected by the context I'm in, as well as within the organization, as well as outside of it. And if we want to create an equitable, accessible future, we need to understand that every individual is part of a collective, and that drives their behavior, and that behavior is cultural and contextual. So that means we need to look at things in the bigger scheme and in how there's a push and pull between the different decisions we make and different structural engineer, how we structurally engineer the world we live in. The more we segregate and separate and structurally engineer it to fit silos, the more we're asking people to adapt, and that is not sustainable. So taking, for example, the way we've designed our cities, that is very segregated. Transport system is one thing, separate from education system, separate from healthcare system. And that means the individual and the society is having to constantly adapt to all of these different layers in the system, rather than look at what kind of life we want to give people and shape the the systems around that. And that's where we can create purpose-led organizations such as Patagonia, because they understood intuitively that they are part of bigger systems, and they don't ask their employees or their buyers, their consumers, to become something else while they were there with them. They just enhance the experience. And that probably comes from the founder's perspective, having started the company as a response to a need he saw within his community, the hiker, the nature lover community. But he understood the nature lover community is not externalized from nature. It is part and parcel of to nature, and it's not externalized to the urban community either. And that, I believe, is why in that intuitive organizational design that Patagonia has. But we can be very not just intuitive, we can be driven to create something similar by thinking in the same way. And that's where we can put the S at the heart of a strategy and create strategies for organizations that are people-centric, society-centric, and planet-centric, purpose-driven, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And now that you mention strategy, it's your field, of course. So if a company would want to start, I hope that most companies have already started thinking about their sustainability strategy. But what is a good starting point for you? We've talked about the SDGs, for example. Is that a good leverage point, do you feel, or?
They're a good tool, but even for the SDGs to be a good tool, we need to understand the who.
Mm-hmm.
We can take it to start a strategy that is sustainable and that is long-term thinking and effective. We need to go down to the basic questions. Who are we talking about and who are we talking to? Why is it important to them and why are we doing this? What is it and how do we do it? If we come down to these 4 basic questions, these are the questions that come into our mind as we live our lives on a day-to-day basis. So the first question is asking who do we, and that's identified as the stakeholder ecosystem, not just the consumer that is buying from us or the employees that are in our company, but as Patagonia did, the different players, the different stakeholders, and the different faces of the individuals within that journey. So it needs to start looking at the individual as a complete journey from their cradle to their grave and beyond. Somebody was even asking me once, how do you take sustainability into your daily life? And I said, it's not just on the daily life. I even consider my afterlife. Where am I going to be buried? What is going to happen to me after life? Because that is still my effect on the planet and how I leave it. If I'm going to be embalmed, I'm going to pollute the planet in my afterlife. But if I get, donated to science or organ donor, etc., I feel like I'm leaving a benefit to society, as my uncle had did when he passed away. Now, if we start with thinking about the who and their continuous journey from cradle to grave as the essential core of an organizational strategy, we start looking at that in a different, we start looking at the strategy differently, because it means it's not just seeing the individual as one thing, the buyer, the consumer. I need to extract as much value out of that individual as possible, but a part and parcel of how the organization shapes its future. So you then move from the journey of the individual into the journey of the organization. And it becomes also, and if I'm not mistaken, by law, now organizations are seen or have the status of an individual. Let's treat them also in the same way as mapping their journey from cradle to their grave, because no organization is going to live forever. How does it end its journey? And not that not that we're going towards the end very quickly, but there's going to be that journey alongside. And when you start paralleling these two things, then you can start looking at it from what is the purpose, but also what are the products and services that the organization can offer that creates that feedback, that positive feedback loop between it and the society. That's where we start looking at why and how and what. Mm-hmm. So simply, that's a shift in the way we look at strategic transformation, and that creates a long-term view for the organization that then we look backwards to say, how do we create that journey to get to that destination?
Yes, I can. It's indeed capturing the whole to really narrow it down, because as you already indicated, each company operates in their own specific context. You have different differences in value chain, supply chain, what not only the end of a company as you indicated, but also the products, what happens beyond their use and etc. So it's indeed I think very important to tackle it broad, but then also see or I can imagine that it's also very important to see, okay, but what is important for my company, taking all those specifics into account, taking their specific context into account, because for example, the SDGs, you have 17, not all will be equally relevant for each company.
Indeed.
So, and that's where I think that the materiality assessment really comes in, where you really need to narrow it down and see, okay, what is it that's where my company can have a positive or a negative impact, and how should we address that?
And that's the what and the how part. No. Now, tell me, Jessica, if we want to create that sustainable future, how does the legal side play a massive role into enabling that transformation?
Well, for me, I'm a lawyer, so I'll always defend the law, of course. But in my opinion, legal is very important as your baseline. A solid compliance framework should be part of your overall sustainability governance framework. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important. So I don't think that you can create real added value if you don't have a baseline where you are compliant in terms of, for example, well-being legislation, human rights, labor conditions, etc. The real value for me is beyond compliance. So, but that doesn't take away, you need to have that baseline of compliance. So monitoring and seeing that you remain compliant during your sustainability journey is for me the essence. You can't have the value without the compliance.
And what if the law is set in a way that is not equitable? How do you comply, or how do you challenge? And I'm going to refer to something in history where it was illegal for women to vote, and it was enshrined in legislation. But that was not a fair law nor equitable law. And it took a lot of women to fight external to the law to be able to transform that law. How do you see the ability of organizations to play the role of making sure the law is equitable and fair?
Yeah, I think in general, I'm of course an employment lawyer, so I'll grab to an example in employment law. In Belgium, we see our basic framework of employment laws dates back from 1978, so it's not really up to date. Some changes have been made, but it really doesn't facilitate the needs that employees have today. I'm speaking needs in terms of flexibility, so that you can have more balance and be with your family or enjoy your private life and still have a good work ethic and environment. The law doesn't provide for that. So what we see is that employers, not employees, of course, employers go beyond what's legally required. They are looking for solutions that are still legal, of course, and they are still compliant, but they still try to go beyond to offer employees that flexibility because that they know that's what their employees need today. So I think that companies can be a real front runner to drive legislative change, and depending on the company and the context, that might mean different things or address different topics. But I do feel that that companies can play a vital role in that aspect.
You reminded me of a story we saw we were at the team building day in the Ghent Museum of Industry, and we saw a story there of how one of the bosses of the textile industries was the first to offer sick day paid leave, for their employees. And he was chastised by all the other bosses of the textile industries. But once he did that, it became impossible for the others not to follow suit. And it is thanks to his initiative, his innovative initiative, that it is now enshrined in law that I'm having a tongue twister with that one, is mandatory in law.
Yeah.
And it takes, as Margaret Mead says, committed individuals to change the world.
Yeah, and I think due to the fact that we live in a globalized environment, and especially operate in a globalized environment, people or companies tend more to see things in other countries that they want to implement themselves. For example, there has been a real drive to, for example, implement 4-day working weeks. We've been working for 5 days a week since the Ford era.
Yeah.
But up until now, nobody really realized, okay, is that beneficial for us? Is it still working? Taking everything into account that we have today. I'm talking about automation and technological options, and that didn't exist back in the day. So there you really see that across the globe you have different countries, governments, but also organizations that are really driving that change, even though the legislative framework still isn't up to par.
And what's interesting is that the studies show that where they've implemented the 4-day week, the productivity has gone up.
Yep. Well, it depends. You have, for example, in Belgium, we have 4-day working weeks where we maintain the working time, but do it on 4 days.
Right.
That's a different story, but indeed,
yes,
where people just keep their salary, but work 4 days instead of 5 with the same amount.
That is, and there are some interesting things around the emergence of AI in that space.
Definitely.
Because I believe AI will allow us to create a positive impact on society and use that interaction that we have with the technology. And I believe that will then fill that gap that we keep seeing, which is the measurement on social impact and societal impact. Now, AI is still pretty much basic at these days. It's still pretty much a glorified machine learning. What we have coming up, and it's when we hit quantum computing, there the conversation is going to change completely. And if we don't put people at the heart of that conversation, we're going to let computers and technology run amok with the society we want to create. So I believe we need to start by asking the who first, both on the technologies we're creating, as you were mentioning the chips earlier or Alfred Nobel, and what do we want to do with it? Now, it is not enough to have legislation say, like there was I believe the law this week saying that an AI cannot hold a patent. That's one thing, but that's not enough. Because at the end of the day, we are already in a world where we're in a way humanoids, because each one of us holds a computer in our hands, the phone. It's an extension of who we are. It has enabled a lot of opportunities in rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa as well as India, where it gave access to banking, it gave access to opportunities. Technologies such as a just transition in energy transition and a clean one will help leapfrog an access to that economic world that we benefit from in the West to places that are non-electrified at this point as well. So there's that's integrated, holistic approach and understanding these ripples that come through a system-led approach is where we need to start shifting to create a better and more sustainable future.
Yeah, and indeed, because at the end, we can't forget that all these technological innovations are, as you said, they're an extension of us. The idea is to invest in these type of creations to create more equality for all, more accessibility for all. And that's for me the real driver in a sustainability journey, where you put people in the heart of your strategy and your behavior. That's where we not only think of, okay, how can this help us in our direct environment, but how can we use what we have to create more equality, more accessibility, and more prosperity for all.
So tell me, Jessica, are you an optimist about the future that lays ahead?
Always.
Same here.
Always, no. The road ahead is not easy, but no one said it has to be. We've been living on borrowed time, so to speak. So I'm very optimistic. If I see all the great people, even here at PwC, that are putting in the work each day and trying to invest in smaller steps in their day-to-day behavior, but also investing in bigger projects to help companies really take into consideration and helping them act on what they should do to have positive impact, yes, then I'm an optimist.
Same here. I think there's so much beauty and ingenuity in our human spirit that we need to remember that, and remember that we can create a far better future for each other and for those who we don't know. And we have the privilege to be able to give voice to those that don't have a voice, but also create better future for those who are voicing concern. And I hope we can bring along every optimist and every dreamer out there to come join the journey with us.
Yes, definitely. I can't say it in a better way. So I think it would be a great conclusion of this podcast.
Thank you for joining me in this conversation, Jessica.
Very welcome, and thank you as well, Samar.
Samar and Jessica brought a very interesting philosophical perspective on the social aspect of ESG. The people side should actually be at the center of all organizations. The core reason why we have organization is, in the end, to provide a better life to everyone. This perspective enhances the importance of looking at the impact organizations have on all stakeholders, employees, local communities, people in the value chain, etc. Interestingly, the S of ESG is not the most visible one today, while in their perspective, it is the most important aspect and the core reason for the existence of organizations. For me, this conversation is a call to rethink how our companies are creating value for all their stakeholders. Many thanks for listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed this series and find it inspiring, do not hesitate to share it with colleagues, friends, or family. In the end, the more people we engage in changing our business world, the bigger our impact will be. See you in the next one.